Reseña la investigadora Ana Alonso Moreno en una
Scene of the
publicación
investigator Alonso Moreno in an investigation of February 2018 about the Arctic Russian in the Granada section, citing another actor of last name Goldman. For the first time, the Christoph Marguerite, a Russian ship, was the first ship that went to the Arctic without an icebreaker. In a time record of 19 years between Russia and South Korea, 30% faster than from the Suez Channel to ports remote, which is the North Sea route. This gives us an idea of a zone of the North Polar Circle with extreme conditions that are more and more interests, economic and financial. There will be a clash of potencies in any moment, even if it's paradoxical. The global warming and the importance of the Arctic. We'll make a first approximation named Geopolitics of the Arctic, another region in conflict. We'll see the actors that are involved. We have your company, right? Let's go.
Beijing tiene el reto de ser un estado casi
Beijing
ártico,
is
pero la distancia más corta entre
being
China y el
almost
Ártico
Arctic,
es de
but the
900
smallest
millas.
distance
Solo hay
is
estados
over
árticos, estados
900
no
miles.
árticos.
There are only
No
Arctic
existe una
states
tercera
and non-Arctic
categoría.
states. There is
Por
not a
tanto, en
third
este
category.
caso, China no
In
tiene
this
derecho a
case,
nada.
China has no
Sabemos que
right
las
to
ambiciones
anything.
territoriales
We know that
rusas
their
pueden
ambitions
volverse
territorial for
violentas.
Russia can
13.000
become
personas murieron
violent.
debido a la acción agresiva de Rusia en
13,000
Ucrania. Y solo
people
porque el
die
Ártico
in
es lugar
Ukraine,
desértico,
and only
no
because the
significa que
Arctic
deba
is a
convertirse en un
desert
lugar
place,
desértico. Tiene
shouldn't
su
become a disordered place. See, he said that on Monday, 7th of May, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, in his intervention, he recognized the Arctic Ocean has become a scenario of power and global competencies. And on that same Monday, in the city of Rovaniemi in Finland, was the end of the biannual Arctic Council. Governments from the Arctic, we're going to specify which ones, and the indigenous territories that originally inhabit that region. The first time in 33 years of history of this summit, there was no accord signed. And why this happened? Because of the negative of the United States to compromise in the fight for the climate change, which is a conditional point. That's how the ministers of these 8 countries, we'll come back to that, were forced to present a generic brief text where there is no reference to climate change and global warming. These are the things. If you remember what we heard Mike Pompeo saying about China and Russia and their interests, and in what the United States say represents a menace of aggression, on 9th of April, a little bit more than a month, Sergei Lavrov, the Minister of Russia, the United States of Russia, we are not compromising on anything, only to have the measures to grant us the security of our country. In the region of the Arctic or any other region of Russia, it's oriented to this and only to this. We are not menacing anybody. We are proportionating the capacities of the defense that are necessary. We are not menacing anybody. The military is not a priority, but however we are ready to defend ourselves. That's the summary of what the Russian position is. It's higher than that. Is the ceiling of the globe, is the refrigeration system of the Earth. Where is it? Which countries are there? Have been there territorial disputes? We're gonna see it in our map. Arctic is the area on the Pole North in the Earth. It has the ocean, portions of Russia, United States, Canada, Denmark,
Islandia, Suecia,
Iceland,
Noruega, por las islas Svalbard y
Norway,
Finlandia.
and
En total es una superficie 40 veces mayor
it's
que la
a
de España.
space
Rusia, Canadá,
40 times
Dinamarca,
bigger than
Noruega y
Spain.
Estados Unidos tienen
These
costas en el
countries
océano.
have
No así
coast in the
Islandia,
ocean,
Suecia y
not
Finlandia,
Iceland,
lo cual les pone en
Sweden,
desventaja
and
respecto de
Finland,
los otros 5.
which
Por su
is
naturaleza es un área
less
única.
than other
La
countries.
mayor parte es un
It's an
extenso océano
unique
cubierto de
nature.
banquisa o hielo marino,
There
rodeado por
is
espacios despoblados de árboles y
ocean
subsuelo
ice.
helado. En él viven especies
It's
animales
freezing.
y
There are
vegetales con
species
características físicas que les permiten
with
adaptarse al
have
ambiente
characteristics that
extremadamente
let
gélido.
them
En el
adapt to
norte de
that
Alaska, Groenlandia y
much
Canadá
cold.
predomina el grupo étnico inuit que tiene
The
dos
Inuit
culturas
group
diferentes,
ethnic,
Dorset y Thule. En el
Dorset
sur
and
de
Tulet,
Alaska y la
in the
península
south of
siberiana del
Alaska
Chukchi
and
viven los
Siberia
Yupik.
are the
Como se
Yupik.
trata de un espacio que reacciona
As
de
is a
forma
space
sensible
that
a los cambios de clima,
changes to
para
the climate.
investigadores del
For
calentamiento global y
investigators
cambio
of
climático, el
global
Ártico
warming,
representa un sistema de
the
alerta
Arctic is
temprana
a
de cómo van las cosas. El
first
deshielo en
alert
esta zona
system.
es clara señal de que no
The
van bien. De hecho, el principal problema de esta área
out of
geográfica es la
ice
pérdida de
is
masa helada o reducción
the
del
destruction
porcentaje
of the
helado del
ice,
océano
of
y
percentage of
derretimiento de
the
la capa
ice
de
in the
hielo de
ocean,
Groenlandia,
and
lo cual es
melting
visto al
of the
mismo tiempo
poles,
como una oportunidad
which
ideal
is
para
also
la
an
apertura de
opportunity
nuevas rutas
ideal
de
for
transporte
new
de mercancías
transportation
vía
routes of
marítima entre Asia, Europa y
merchandise
América, sin necesidad
for
de barcos
Asia
rompehielos o submarinos nucleares.
and North
También
America,
para el turismo y para la
also for
explotación
tourism
comercial de
and for the
importantes depósitos de
exploitation of
hidrocarburos,
commercial
minerales
for
preciosos y
oil and
recursos
some
pesqueros
minerals
que tiene
and
el
fishing
Ártico en su rico
resources
haber,
that the
tan
Arctic
privilegiado
has,
que representa un
which is so
tercio de las
privileged
reservas
that
mundiales de
is
gas.
a
De
third
modo que
of
el
the
Ártico es un
gas
área de
resources
enorme
of the
valía
world.
para los
Is
principales
very
sectores geopolíticos del
wealthy
tablero
for
global.
the
Hay estudiosos de la zona que
geopolitical.
prevén conflictividad en el mediano plazo,
There are
visto que varios
conflictivities
países
that can
organizan
be
expediciones
seen in the
cartográficas
short
para
space,
reclamar nuevas porciones de territorio
which
para sí, y hay varias
some countries are
reivindicaciones de expansión territorial
reivindicating
aún irresueltas.
for more
Para
territory.
tratar los asuntos
And
comunes de la
for
región, en 1996 se creó
in
el Consejo
1996 it
Ártico
was
como
created
foro
the Arctic
intergubernamental.
Council
Su actividad
as
se
an
circunscribe en cuestiones medioambientales,
intergovernmental
científicas, de desarrollo
for
sostenible, de cooperación en caso
ambience
de
and
emergencias
cooperation in
y
case of
sesiones
emergencies,
periódicamente.
and they
Chile,
have
igual
a
que Francia,
seasoning
Países Bajos,
every
Polonia,
single
España y
time.
Reino Unido por Escocia, es
Other
miembro
countries are
observador
also
del
members
Consejo,
that are
en su caso
only as
desde
observant
2013, aunque
since
reclama desde hace
2013,
años, lo mismo
but
que la Unión
China
Europea,
is
tener
trying
participación
and the
plena
European
y
Union are trying
propone
to
la ruta
be
de la seda polar
plenipotentiary,
como proyecto
and
estratégico.
China is proposing the route of silk
Nos vamos
as a
complementando
project.
con 3 sitios digitales. Les muestro acá en
We will be
nuestra
complementing with 3
porque la
sites
cuestión energética es
because
determinante y hace parte
the
de la
energetic
analía geopolítica.
means
Como
are
vimos,
important.
vamos a mirar
As we
los
saw,
detalles que ofrece
let's see
esta
the
nota
details that
publicada por la agencia
this
rusa de noticias y análisis
Sputnik
Sputnik,
article
fecha 29 de junio
says
de 2018
from
para quien esté interesado en ampliar.
2018.
Gazprom Neft prevé extraer
The
unos
Gazprom Neft
14,5
will
millones de
extract
toneladas de crudo en el Ártico.
14.5 million
Bueno,
tons of
allí hay unas
oil from
declaraciones
the Arctic.
importantes, ya les digo
There are
de
some
quién. Se
declarations
trata
that
de
are very important.
yacimientos, Novoportovskoe,
3 more oil
y
spaces.
Mesoyazkoe, seguramente así no se pronuncian las 3 palabras
This is not the
rusas.
pronunciation of
Esto
the
lo
Russian
declaraba
words.
el primer vicedirector
This is
general
the
de
first
Gazprom Neft, Vadim
vice
Vazkev.
director
Agregaba que la
who
compañía
said it.
tiene varias
The company
licencias en la
has
región ártica,
several
por lo cual
licenses
puede
in the
operar
Arctic
legalmente,
to
incluida
operate
la de
legally,
Yuzhno-Novoportovsky. Todas se
even
encuentran en
Yuvno
fases de
Novoportovsky,
prospección geológica o
which are
ideas
being
ampliar
in
nuestra
the
base de recursos
exploration
primarios,
phase
explicaba.
and
La
trying to
extracción
get
prevista podría
better
aumentar a
primary
más de
sources,
20 millones de
which
toneladas
could
desde esos 14,5
make bigger
millones que se están previendo
over 20
ya en
million
esa fecha que se
tons
publicaba la noticia.
in
Incluso
those
podría
times
ser
that
desde
the
antes.
news was
Me voy a
published.
estudios de política exterior.
Now I go to the studies of
Esta publicación
Geopolitics that has this publication
número
on its
154
number
que
164,
va de julio a agosto 2013,
which is from
Geopolítica del
July and
deshielo
August
en el Ártico,
2013,
de la autoría de Blanca Palacián, de
from
INSA,
Blanca
de Ignacio
Palacián,
Sánchez.
INSA, and
Identifican
Ignacio
estos
Sánchez.
dos autores
Both
abajo de una
actors
amplia
have a
investigación
big
muy,
investigation,
minuciosa,
very
que
minutious one,
existe un primer
that there
anillo
is
o anillo
a
interior
first
que incluye
ring or
los
interior ring
5 estados
that
litorales
includes
del
5
Ártico
states
que se
of the
disputan el
Arctic
control y ejercicio
that
de
are
soberanía en la
disputing
región.
the control of
Hay
the
un
region.
segundo anillo, aquí
The
lo
second
ven,
ring
el primer ítem ahora abajo, al segundo, que
The
lo
second ring
identifican como intermedio,
was an
lo
intermediate
constituyen
ring.
aquellos países y organizaciones
Those
que
countries
si
and
bien
organizations
no
that
son
are
limítrofes,
not
no
in
quieren
the
quedarse
limits
fuera de los
but don't
acuerdos y
want to be
foros
outside
en
of
los que
the
se
accords
discuta
and
su futuro,
forums where
otros
they
intereses
discuss their
económicos y
future
comerciales.
for the
Ahí están
interests
Finlandia,
economic
Islandia y Suecia, que
and
no son
commercial ones.
litorales como los otros 5 que
These
se
countries are
encontraban
not
en el mapa,
literal of the
que refiere a este
Arctic,
artículo, pero que
but
evidentemente
they
tienen
are
opción
evidently part of the Arctic. The third ring is the exterior ring, is formed by the rest of the world, by the rest of the countries and organizations that see with warning the impact, economic and security impact of this space. China, Japan, Singapore, and the European Union, who were determined not to be excluded from this region that is for big opportunities. Somebody put our Telesur published this article of an international analyst called the Silk Route of China, almost an Arctic country, is another author that is in between the protagonist actors, complementing China and Russia, try to destroy the decadency Anglo-Saxon do United States and United Kingdom. China is trying to use the Northern Sea, and China has the winner because they use their reserves, which are the best of the world, and the roads and sea roads are going to be used in Eurasia or now in the Arctic. The geography is one of the charts used by the United States to asphyxiate China, but Beijing is contrasting with the Arctic Sea and the Silk Road. Washington can be isolated against the Eurasian union between China and Russia. There you have 31 of January of 2018. Alfredo Khalife is the author. The Road of Silk of China, an almost Arctic country. We're going to put more details, establishing a contact with our correspondent, Jorge Gestoso from Washington, the capital of the United States. Hello, Jorge. Thank you very much. Yes, I'm here in Washington. We are following very closely the war for dominating the resources either in the Arctic or in the Antarctic. It has all to do with the low or less importance that Donald Trump gives to the climate change, that he has gone away from the Paris Accords, but he's arguing also that the climate change it's a Chinese telling. In that sense, the climate change or the protection to achieve the goals that have been proposed for the next years. On the other hand, they're trying not to leave other potencies, other powers like the European Union or Russia and China, take then steps to take control of both poles of the Earth. There is that big contradiction from one side trying to invest and control those resources, and on the other hand leaving the climate change. And in that sense, here in the United States, there are still every day the problems that the climate change is causing: inundations, tornadoes, storms, rains, and even because of all that, the official version is that the climate change and the melting of the poles that has related to that is only a big story. Thank you, George, for all the details. We have to make emphasis in that dichotomy that Jorge Gastezo said from Washington, D.C. is the same, that going further with the importance geopolitically and geostrategically of this big zone of the world. Why so many think tanks are saying that there are countries or that there are governments that are part of permitting the complete defrosting of the glaciers of those zones? Which are the economic interests on this? We have said something in the map, but we'll go further deep. First pause, and we'll come back to it.
Estamos de vuelta para seguir
We're back
desarrollando.
to continue with our critical move, the geopolitics of the Arctic, a new scenario of disputes. We'll say that we are making a first approximation to this. In Russia's reconstruct a military base in the Arctic is one of the things that has Russia today, or actuality RT, with the actualization on 9 of April this year. This installation is one of the first installations. It has 2,050 people. Kotelny is one of the most difficult places in the planet. There are temperatures of less than 50 degrees and has a North Tribal place for the defense and 11,000 of kilometers. It's part of Siberia in the Nordic Ocean. It's part of the Arctic Shield of Russia. Is one of the advanced posts of Russia. This gives us an idea of. We'll come back later, even in the second part of the analysis. It's part of the protagonism of Russia in this region as a country with voice and vote on the Arctic. There is a big amount of characteristics that make the cold places in the Arctic a part of geopolitical. Among many think tanks, there are some that want to stop global warming, that are melting the global poles and will destroy many species and a transformation of the ambience. For others, there is no inconvenience on this position because of the interest of economic and security means. Many states are manifesting the interest in not destroying the melting in the Arctic because of global warming and climate disorders. And that interest is because if there is less ice, there will be in the north, in the east and the west, two new routes of transportation of merchandise. The biggest traffic in the world is by the sea, and in the south of the planet. In the north is almost impossible, but those new roads could be even easier and less energy and less cost and a reduction on the times. This will make better economies in the world and has the possibility of having the territories that control those roads. That happens also with the energetic resources that makes the Arctic Holy Land. Many Repsol, many enterprises are battling for the control of those spaces where there are many resources, oils and fishes that will be very easy of accessing when there is no ice. Nobody has controlled the exploitation of these resources. Security is also very important place. It will give more possibilities in defense for those nations who have a place there, and for submarines, carriers, like for countries of like the United States, Russia, and Canada, that they can lose their Arctic space. Big part of the Arctic space are continental, with less than 500 kilometers. That makes a very difficult. There is a variation in the form and the position of the ice, which makes it difficult to make a map. It gives a very complex space to define. I'm gonna put in our play move from Stockholm, Francisco Contreras, a sociologue and analyst. It's very pleasure to have you here in Telesur. If you want, we can start with a thing that is very important in the first play that has the news. Is the last Arctic summit in the north of Finland without a joint declaration. The poster of the United States on climate change was a change and very important one. Can we reflect about this? Why is this happening? This is not a new move. Yes, good afternoon. As you said, the conference that was 6th and 7th in Finland didn't had an agreement. It didn't result in a declaration by the countries of this Arctic Council. And what happened was more on species of declaration that it wasn't even called declaration, signed by 8, and Finland, who was preceding the Arctic Council, made another declaration bigger and more precise. And the main subject is because the United States and Mike Pompeo, who didn't want to include the climate change in the declaration, to make a constancy of this, that the 40% of the ice cape have been disappearing in the first 4 decades, and there is more sensible this Arctic space for as a route of transportation, but also it makes it accessible for a series of natural resources for its exploitation. What did happen in this game of declarations, Pompeo and the United States were talking about the subject of China, saying that for them they were open China to participate in the council, but also in the exploitation of the Arctic, but they asked for presence from China. It was put on the table very explicitly, the subject of the natural resources and the subject of this zone of new routes that can be done in the Arctic, and the United States is not in this position to make China participate openly. It was clear that the meeting in Finland didn't have good results. The director of foreign relations criticized how poor were the results of this Arctic Council, and also put on the table the subject that they don't wanted to highlight the climate change subject as one of the actual problems in this Arctic Council. I ask you, Francisco, if it is like that, the go up and forth between those who don't want to stop the global warming so they can navigate easier and connect different routes and to exploit the different quantities of resources that are there, and precious minerals and other resources like fishing banks, and those who are fighting for the preservation of the zone and preservation of animals and human beings that are there. Who has the final call, or who will decide the destination of this zone? Well, there are two things. First, Pompeo was very clear about saying that the Arctic was a place of savage place, which is very propitious for exploiting, and all the experts are talking about the natural resources there, but also as a way for commerciating new routes of transportation that will save even 60% of distances and times. And the natural resources, they're talking about 13% of the non-discovered oil is in this zone, and 30% of the non-discovered gas is in this zone also, which is also all Russian. This is so big as Russia, so there is many interests that converge here from all the countries. It has been almost only United States who has put this on the table explicitly, that now with the accessibility of the Arctic, because of global warming, we have to start exploiting it more. But also Norway has seen a declination on their oil resources, has given the permission to 13 international oil companies, and also China and Russia have several investments in these places. According to experts, China in these 6 years has invested over $90 billion in the Arctic region. China and Russia have a lot of cooperation, have developed natural gas and also gas. So it's not only those who are part of the Arctic Council, which are 5 Arctic countries plus Russia, Canada, and the United States, those who have interests in several multinational companies have interest there. Another subject that is very preoccupying is the problem of the militarization of this zone. In the Nordic countries, we have seen the growing of the military exercises that are going on the north, and that has to be linked to the NATO. It's good to precise that. It's part of the NATO, and they say is, of course, to control the Arctic zone. Last year there was a military exercise where there were 50,000 soldiers of 31 countries that are members of the NATO and participate as cooperation with the NATO. Also, aviation has been growing in the northern zone with Norway, Sweden, all the north zone in Sweden and Rovaniemi, Finland is part of the Arctic zone, but also in other parts of north of Norway. Climate change, but there is also a lot of preoccupations of not willing or don't wanting to find ways of break the climate change to stop the defrosting, but also there is a preoccupation in the intensification of the military apparatus to control that zone. Seeing that the interests, economic and commercial, are bigger and bigger, and there are these big potencies in the world making part of the strategic moves, do you see a possible war in there? There is a military front. NATO has a big presence there, but there is also necessary to say that 2 last presidents of the NATO are from Nordic countries. One was from Denmark, and now another one from Norway. And it's not a pure coincidence that they are from the Nordic countries. There is a journalist from Norway, that Eric Wolke, who has worked in the things of WikiLeaks, that the Nordic countries that traditionally are part of those countries, non-aligned countries, but that worked for stability, peaceful stability. Now they are participating more actively in the NATO, and the NATO has tried to involve them more and more in this kind of military exercises because they see the necessity of controlling this zone. And this has been worked for a long time, and the idea of controlling the Nordic and the northern and the Arctic zone, there is a military front active. The NATO is very precise in it. There is a dispute between the European Union and the United States about the NATO and the ways of financing the NATO. And meanwhile, the financing of military activity in the north and in the Arctic zone, there is the United States very open and financing a lot of these exercises. This exists already. On the other hand, it's said that Russia has been doing that from way before, and that over 400 military areas in the zone, in the Arctic zone. is not something new, is not something that will be developed, but is something, or that there is an interest to hire it, but there is already a military presence. What there wasn't is an interest of removing the increasement of military, and in the reunion in the meeting, this theme wasn't debated. The subject wasn't a central subject with the climate change. Thank you very much, Francisco, for talking to us. We'll see you soon. We'll say goodbye to Francisco Contreras, a sociologue and political analyst, who was with us from Stockholm. And now we have Sonia Wiener from Argentina, from the UBA University. Sonia, I want to thank you for listening us. We want your vision on the geopolitical vision of this space that we are talking about. If there were new routes, commercial routes, and there was full exploitation of the resources that are there, what changes we will see in the geopolitical? Good afternoon. And effectively, it's a very hot dispute area where I can say the humanity destiny is there, and for all the region. In that sense, we have to see this that was said, the militarization of the North Arctic and the United States going towards the Antarctic and to the north, and linked also to the UK agencies. It is very preoccupied in Argentina. The exploitation of oil companies from Britain in the southern pole that are nearby the Malvinas Island. In the dispute for the Malvinas Islands, as I've said in several times, they are based in this dispute with the Antarctica, where the oil companies, several extraction companies, has links with the military complex of Britain, linked to the United States, and that want to sell world technology to the NATO too. So we have to see all this web of agencies, and thank you very much, Sonia, for this concise explanation. We have her through the telephone. We don't have communications with her anymore. Thank you. And we had her answer, and as you can see, several media that are making a game of words, a new Cold War in the Arctic. We'll continue with this. Francisco give us our opinion, and Sonia continue with it. And now we're gonna talk with our next guest. I'm only gonna show you, and then I'll talk to you. We will be back. The geopolitics of the Arctic, a new scenario of disputes. There is an open battle for Arctic, not with open confrontations, but with a clear competition for the managing of this region. Russia is more for the economic, but is prepared to defend their interests against any external. NATO is afraid of an expansion of Russia, because the shortest way between Russia and America goes through the Arctic space. We'll go further the position of Russia, China, and we'll see more analysis. On the last 20th of February, in an interview with the Washington Examiner, the U.S. Navy for Africa and Europe, Admiral James Forgot, said that nor Russia nor China will dominate the Arctic, which is a big lake that doesn't belong to anybody, but is international domain. The Minister of Defense of the United Kingdom said that his country will grow its presence in the Arctic to protect it from Russia, the north flank of the NATO. The U.S. Marine has affirmed in the Wall Street Journal that in next month the region will be transited by a war ship, but the real is that the United States seems behind. Russia is most proactive countries in the zone who ask for a frontier near Norway, traversing the North Pole and finishes in the Bering Strait with the limit with the United States. It's part of the Eurasia platform, but West doesn't accept that because it will be giving too much space to Russia. In August 2017, the first minister, Dmitry Peperek, said that Russia would put more than $400 billion, and the government of Putin is not living in the zone alone. It's constructing a defense military base to defend it, and China wants to develop the Silk Route of the North Pole to transportation, with emphasis in the secure transportation, putting terrestrial space and making more mining. They developed a document in 2016 in this phrase is summarized. China wants to be part of the strategic route that would control this route. We are one question in the air, and I'm gonna make it to Luis Paz, internationalist, investigation, climate change, conflicts. You're here in the studio. Welcome. The question is, I'll take it again, but I want to know if you agree with us that Russia, as what we have seen, is the most proactive state and protagonistic state. It doesn't mean that the United States is falling behind, but it's a little bit less active. Yes, in the case of the Arctic, is a new case now since 1981, where there were the first alerts for the climate change. It was established that 12% of the pole caskets, ice caskets, were starting to melt. That 10% has been growing, and in the times of summer and of winter, there are new open maritime zones. The Arctic wasn't taken into the accounts in the geopolitical. They never took into account the Arctic as a geopolitical important subject. Speakman also, many of them are based in the Persian Gulf, the space for control of the oil resources. The Arctic for Russia, in the case of Russia, is very important to a point. Historically, they haven't put it a lot of importance of it. They sold Alaska that in a price that is almost nothing, but Russia sold it so they wouldn't give it up to Great Britain because it was the actor that they were fighting in that moment, especially in the roads of space. But in the Second World War, in 41-45, Arctic gets a better importance, and it was a way to send things to Russia. It was a way to attack Germany. In the Cold War, there was more importance too, because it was the shortest way between Russia and the United States. They were put first alert military zones in the Arctic. It was the center of the combat in the Cold War in some points. When there was the process of melting in the Arctic, since 2013 with the declaration of Russia of the strategy for military, the Arctic started to be more important. It began the confrontation with the United States. Another actor that is important is China, which doesn't have frontiers with the Arctic. However, it has a lot of interest to invest a lot of money to create more infrastructure. Russia won't be able to make all the infrastructure, but China can. Yeah, China can. That's what gives power to China. And Russia, in the route of the Silk, they can put that corridor in the north for the transportation of the resources of the China merchandising. It will stop the influence of the Panama Channel and the Suez Channel. There are other elements that are very important. The case of Russia is like 15% of the is part of the resources produced in the Arctic. Also, the Geological Institute of the United States, there are around over 14,000 billion oil barrels. From those, more than the half is from Russia, and they have the 70% of control of the Arctic zone. There are other states that want to have an important role there, which is Canada also, that have the road of the northeast, that can lower the cost when you go from Canada to Asia, which would reduce the costs of the Asian markets. Russia, in this case, they depend a lot of China because they don't have a lot of resources. So Russia and China are together, and it's their convenience because the United States is trying to attract the European Union, mainly Norway, Finland, and create a bloc against the China presence. Mike Pompeo said it very graphically in the conference that there was in the Arctic Commission, when he said that China has nothing to do there, and it was a subject for the countries that have a frontier there, and some other countries, Iceland and Norway. Norway has also a big importance because Norway represents the 7% of their economy. The Arctic represents 7%, and it's very important because Norway is a fundamental actor that has negotiated with Russia international accords for the delimitation. The delimitation subject is fundamental. It is fundamental as there is a lot of reivindications because the control of the limits in the marine zones implies the concessions that the states can give for the ships that transit that zone. It would also imply the transit of resources. In the case of Canada, wouldn't allow the United States. There is a confrontation because the United States, the passing zone of the North-Occidental Zone, is a part of their interior waters, and the Canada have the right to give pass to some states and not others. In other zones, in the exclusive economic zone of 200 miles to the coast, and you have more control of the state on their marine and submarine and oil and biodiversity. There is no treaty or convention that controls that. There is none inside the Arctic, but only the rights of sea, and another one that tries to make some delimitation of the waters, that gives also the free navigation on the sea. When you're over 200 nautical miles, you're talking about marines that are under the international community. Obviously, there are discussions because some countries are trying to make it bigger, the continental platform of the underground projections, underwater projections. The biggest continental platform, you will have more control of the marine areas. Russia, for example, is trying to augmented from 200 miles over to 300 miles. But that has to be proven scientifically. This is why there are so many investigations, biologicals, that they are sending study groups to make a delimitation and to see where the continental platform is bigger and bigger. Because in some sense, the continental platform will give you more control on many areas. On the same time, it's a very delicate zone because the equilibrium of the planet Earth, say many analysts, depends on the conservation of the natural characteristics of this region. Is it like this? Yes, when they signed the Convention of Paris, they shouldn't augment the CO2 emissions more than 1.5. The maximal level would be 2 centigrade, but 1.5 would guarantee that in 2030 we won't have the biggest consequences of what is the climate change. But the fact is that it continues to go up. The temperatures in the Arctic, there will be the disappearance of the permafrost is the ice caps that are on the Earth's superficies. If that happens, there will be a big liberation of methane, of a CO2 greenhouse effect, which is there will be several effects on the ambience. But the climate change is a determination, but it has been marginalized from the political agenda. For example, the United States, we have seen how it was treated. The United States is not recognizing the climate change as an effect that generates the defrosting of the poles. However, even the United States are playing a lot that China goes away because they want to make investments with other countries. The case of China is fundamental because they are going to invest a lot of resources in Greenland because they have a lot of variety of rare minerals that are used for space industry or electricity, and that is very important for China. The United States are gambling for the military options to make more military bases with the countries of the United States and the European Union. There are over 40 bases, military and for geographics. The case of Russia are only 12. However, it implies also that Russia has to invest a lot of money to maintain it. The United States have the conditions in the budget and techniques. In the case of a failure, they would have to go for Russia because they have more preparation. Yes, Russia and the Arctic Commission have been working for once the marine route happens, they have more experience of the climate change or spilling of oil. Russia will also have been working with the European Union to mitigate the effects also because they are conscious that the climate change will generate a series of negative effects on the biodiversity, fauna, and everything. But they are also interested in opening the maritime routes because they will allow them to have some resources. The fact that the Arctic it's melting will give access to minerals, different minerals like gold, platinum, diamonds that Russia in this moment from that 15% they are already extracting from Siberia and the Kamchatka Peninsula. Thank you very much, Luis, for being with us. This is the first approximation, and we're going to see other points of view, and thank you very much. We'll go to the conclusions and the final part. The Arctic cold scenario and a hot one also is very relevant. The grave situation in the Arctic is very important because its existence as a cold continent is important for having equilibrium. The global warming is melting, and because of this, they are allowing more exploitation of resources that will warm furthermore the globe in the fight of conquest of new space. It's not the only one, but it's an important indicator of a global problem, like the menace of the global warming. We are going to investigate more about this. You can wait for it. You can wait in a new critical move. Continue with your viewing Telesur. Thank you very much.